Hello, my name is Sandra and I'm Fred's assistant. Actually, just kidding, I'm his wife. So today I actually want to talk about something I enjoy doing, which is resin art. But before we actually go into detail about resin art, I wanted to make sure it's something you want it to do. A lot of people will show all the glitzy parts of it and they'll basically show the highlights, but they don't really show the drawbacks. And so the first thing we're going to do is do like a checklist to see if you want to do resin art. So the obvious pros of resin art, you have mostly permanent art that people can wear, use, is pretty durable, is so widely customizable. It is kind of pricey when you first start up, but after a while, the most cost is in the epoxy and the time you put into it. So it's not like a constant investment like something like scrapbooking, which is even more outrageous than resin art if you don't know how to do it properly. Also, again, just making those finished pieces that you can give as gifts. I mean, you can give scrapbooks and Cricut personalizations as gifts, but there's something just totally different about making a customized piece for a friend. Now, as far as drawbacks, it is a dangerous substance. It's chemicals. I have actually set a batch of it on fire before. I have gotten some chemical burns from it because my gloves were not the right size, and we'll get into that part next. But it is a toxic chemical, and even if it says it's odorless, it still has chemical fumes. So you have to make sure you're wearing proper protection every time. You have to have a space that's well ventilated. So it's not like scrapbooking or anything like you can just sort of do anywhere, or watercolors, you can even do it like on the go. You have to have a pretty big ventilated space with extra fans if you can get it, and also you have to have a dust-free area. As far as safety is concerned, you want to make sure you're not using like a thin medical mask or a cloth mask. It has to be something that can stop fumes and chemical fumes. Also, you want to wear gloves, and again, I recommend that you find some kind of gloves that fit your hands. Don't buy like a giant large gloves if you have small hands and let that chemical get inside of them or anything like that. You also want to make sure, I personally recommend wearing long sleeves, even if it's kind of hot, and resin does tend to enjoy, a nice hot climate. But wear long sleeves while you work in clothes that you don't mind losing. Also, I wear safety goggles, not just for resin, but any of the dust and things like you use to color the resin. It is important to find specific things that fit you and that will protect your lungs and your skin. Now that you looked at the pros and cons of resin art, let's go ahead and get into the details on how to get started. So you'll need a few things. So there is actually art that you can make trays and things like that without a mold, but if you're beginning, I recommend getting a cheap mold that you don't mind losing. So there's some that are like $5 to $8 on Amazon, or I think Let's Resin has a nice website with different little cost-effective molds. Also, a tip that most people don't know, resin, I think the top temperature it could get to, like while it's curing, it's like 150 degrees Fahrenheit or something like that. So you want to get a mold that can withstand that much heat or more. And of course, baking molds, like chocolate making molds and like cooking molds, things like that, they tend to be made to reach like 450 degrees. So if you see a really cute baking mold, like I got an Easter mold with little chicks in it or something like that on the discount shelf, or a lot of times chocolate making molds are like $5, or I got some yesterday for $3. Of course, once you use them for resin, please don't bake or cook anything in them. The only drawback to those is a lot of times they will have a pretty big cavity, so it takes a lot of resin, but you can just use less resin. You don't have to fill them up to the top. I think it's a great choice for a beginner to start with just, those cheap baking molds or chocolate making molds, because again, if you mess them up or set them on fire, which hopefully you won't do, you can almost just throw them out and, buy something else. So now we've gone over the basics of the type of mold you'll need. Let's talk about the tools associated with using resin. So first you'll have your mixing tool. So I recommend getting these stirring sticks that are reusable. Usually they're blue and they have like a rounded surface to them and they have actual wire in it. So it helps you stir. You can get the just regular flat plastic ones, but I would recommend using those for just mixing colors into them so that you don't hurt your wrist while you're doing it. You'll actually need some, I call them like bubble poppers, but these little sticks that have a pointed edge you can use to get into cavities and release bubbles. So you definitely need some of those. You can also use pipettes. You'll also need some kind of measuring cup, and you can buy reusable silicone measuring cups. So you can do that too. Some people use plastic, but those measuring cups can be pretty pricey. Now for the non-mixing part of tools, I would recommend getting a scale if you're using resin that can be measured by weight. And also I would recommend getting a thermometer that you can use, not the one with the little tip you have to insert, which you can do that, but I recommend getting one that you can do from a distance and kind of just check the temperature, kind of like the ones they use to check your forehead. A lot of those will have an option that says surface temperature, and so you can measure the surface of your resin with the thermometer. You'll also need some silicone mats for, catching things, and a level surface. So if you have a great granddad that carved the hand carved table and painted it and stained it, don't use that table for resin art because it probably will get ruined no matter how many mats you put on it. You would have to like tape it up with bags and things like that, and you probably still get a little drop that would just fall somewhere on it. So like what I use now is one of those rolling like hospital bed tray things, and it is like a work of art on its own. It's just covered in resin. So find something that is flat and you don't mind it having a little resin on it. Typically if you have something like that is like a metal table or something like that, you can reheat the resin and pull it off with like tape or something like that, but it is a struggle. The most important thing you'll need in addition to the mixing tools would be something to get rid of bubbles. I recommend a heat gun because it's a lot harder to burn something or destroy something with a heat gun than a torch or a long nose lighter. I'll see a lot of people using a long nose lighter because it is cheap, but I've had times where the lighting fluid would run into my piece and kind of ruin it. And just in general, I'm really clumsy, so I didn't want to set anything on fire. I went ahead and bought a heat gun, and I have never regretted it. It's so much easier to use, and it's got 2 settings on it. You can even buy ones that can let you do waves, like with a nozzle extension. Just get a heat gun. Now let's talk about resin itself. So there's different types of resin. We have deep pour, casting, doming, like 4-hour speed resin. There's lots of different kinds of resin, and I recommend you go with something that's user-friendly. Some of the resin can be measured by volume, so basically you have to use a measuring cup to be precise, and also there could be some that can measure by weight, which is actually really easy. I recommend getting a scale with those. If you find that your resin can be weighed, just buy a $10 like kitchen scale, and it will save so much time. I would recommend Pudo because it's pretty user-friendly and it has a long work time, and you'll hear work time in every video. Oh, it has this much work time, 30-minute work time. You probably wonder, what is that? Okay, work time is how much time you have to maneuver and manipulate your resin before it starts to get tacky and you can't do anything with it. Just look at your package and see how long it lasts. It is important for you to read the instructions on your specific type of resin thoroughly. Do not just throw away that pamphlet and be like, I saw a YouTube video, I know what I'm doing. So please follow the instructions to the letter if you can, and be safe. Now that we talked about actual resin, we want to talk about the chemical reaction behind that resin. So in order for it to harden, you mix the 2 sides together and it gets not super heated but pretty hot. What you need to know is that resin should never reach over or 99 degrees Fahrenheit or over when you're mixing it. And I'll get somebody to put a Celsius conversion, but it's important to know that because you could end up setting something on fire, burning yourself. When it happened to me, I was mixing a top coat for some bar resin. Basically, it's for surfaces people use for drinks and stuff. And I wanted to make some trays, but when I was stirring it, I followed the instructions, but what I had done was I watched a YouTube video and they told me to heat my resin before I did it. So I left my resin in some hot water and then I mixed it 6 minutes on top of that. And of course it started smoking, and luckily it was wintertime, so I was able to take it outside and put it on the extremely like freezing cement outside, and it cooled it down so it didn't catch on fire. That is kind of a tip. You can have like a box or Tupperware of cold water. You want to fill it up like with ice water, and then if you're mixing something and you take the temperature and it's like 89 or 92 degrees or like 95, you see it getting to that point, you can take the whole cup, don't dump it out, just take the cup and transfer it to the ice water, and then you want to let it just chill. Okay, you want to let it chill for a few minutes, and you're going to lose some work time, but you'll at least save your resin. Now, in addition to the temperature of a resin, you have to keep in mind that the temperature of your environment also impacts how your resin sets and how you actually can use your resin. So the hotter it is in your house or your office or your studio, wherever you're working with your product, the hotter it is, then the quicker the resin is going to set. Ideally, it should be 60 to 65 degrees at the lowest point, because below that it does do weird things, like it will never harden properly. Like I made some trays when it was like 40 degrees, and I live in an older house, so parts of my house don't get heated as well. So they have dimplings. Like I would put tissue paper in the tray and it would scratch it, the tissue paper would scratch it, like anything could scratch the surface. It doesn't harden ever. Even though it's technically set, it's very soft. It has like dimples or honeycombs, like that kind of thing happens when you cast in too low temperatures. So if you have to, and you don't have central air, and you have a small workspace like outside or something like that, or a garage, you might want to consider bringing like a portable heater and letting it run while you're awake and while you can monitor it and keep that space warm. I believe they said the magic number is like 8 hours. I saw that on some resin video for the actual brand. Like a lot of times the resin producers themselves will put together videos to kind of help you understand how to cast their product, but yeah, 8 hours, I think it has to be in a controlled temperature. And even after that, it still can be a little wonky if you go below that. But what I would encourage you to do is cast on the weekend or a day that you don't have to work, or if you're an artist, then you're good. You don't have to have a 9 to 5 or anything like that. But I do have another job, so I wait till the weekends. When in the wintertime, I wait till the weekends to cast, and I can monitor the heater where I put my workspace. And when it's time for me to go to bed, I just unplug it, make sure the room is sealed so that the temperature can stay the same, and then the next morning it's fine. And in summertime it's great because I can cast whenever, because outside it's at least 80 to 90 degrees all the time. Again, obviously I'm in the South, so if I were to turn off my air conditioner for a bit, it can get to about 76, 77, 78 pretty quickly. And when you're trying to work on that temperature, just know that it's going to start to gum up pretty fast. Like normally you might have 30 minutes work time, but if your workspace is at 60, 76 or 77 degrees, then you got maybe 15 minutes work time before it starts to solidify. So I had to find that out the hard way. And I noticed like I was working on some jewelry, but the cups that I had ready for different colors, by the time I got ready to use the colors, they had already kind of gelled over. So I had to basically throw it out because my work time had been reduced so much. So now before I actually cast, if it's really hot outside, I'll let the AC run till it's like 68 or something like that. Then I'll turn it off because you don't want dust and everything flying around while you're casting. And then gradually it'll come up to about 75, and by the time it gets that high, I would have done all my work and then covered my pieces, and then I could turn the AC back on. So now that we understand that resin is a chemical reaction, you can kind of understand that whole work time concept, and we can understand how to use resin, that time, into our advantage. So a lot of people, it seems like they don't just clearly explain why these techniques work. So for example, the feathering technique, they say just wait an hour and come back. Well, why are you waiting an hour? Is it just magic? Does a unicorn come out and, you know, make swirls for you? What's going on? So basically, you're waiting for that resin to gel to the point where when you swirl it, part of it, the clear part of it at the bottom of that feathering technique is stable so that you can make designs behind it and it looks like a glass looking in. Because if you didn't wait that time, then it's just going to be mixing the colors in the resin. The colors would just mix and become garbled. When I first started making jewelry, which is not what I enjoy doing necessarily, but when I started making jewelry, I had to figure out the hard way that when you try to layer colors in the jewelry, they just kept blending. And I didn't know why. I'm like, why can I not get layers on this? Well, it's because I was just throwing resin together. They were all the same temperature. I started all at the same time. And of course, the colors were bleeding together. So what I actually started doing was I would go around and put all of the oceans, the bottom of the ocean first. And the time it took for me to do that, my resin was gelling at the bottom. So then by the time I filled all my molds, when I got ready to do the sky part, it wouldn't blend because it already gelled. Basically, just understanding how resin works helps a lot. The next important thing you'll need to know about resin is additives. So what can you put in resin? That's a whole video by itself pretty much. There's so many videos of people. I recommend a few YouTubers, I think Steve McDonald. He has a whole YouTube channel that just, he puts random stuff in resin and sees what happens. So I definitely would go look at him, and I do all the time. I just like seeing what crazy stuff he can put in there, stamps, ink, whatever he puts in there. But in terms of additives, if you're beginning, you don't want to just ruin the resin. It does cost a lot, and I'm guessing that if you're starting, you don't have a sponsor that can help you by sending you resin. So yeah, don't waste resin on experiments. Let somebody else, a professional that you know has safety precautions, do that for you. Stick with some basic substances. So mica powder. Some people actually, if you can't afford mica powder, which you pretty much can, you can get 24 starter packs on Amazon for like 14 bucks. So even if you couldn't, you could go to the dollar store and use some eyeshadow, because it's pretty much mica powder with a little additive to help, you know, keep it together. But you can use eyeshadow, mica powder, acrylics. I love using acrylic paint. This is so cost effective. I don't know why it's not out there. Maybe people are just sponsored by mica powder and they don't tell people. But I saw this for the first time on another YouTube channel. I think it's the Crafty Nurse. She uses like a tiny drop of acrylic paint to color her resin instead of using mica powder. In addition to that, there's glitter, and then there's metallic powders. So glitter is pretty cheap. I know some people don't like glitter because it can get into the environment and things like that, and I completely agree. And that's why whenever I use glitter for most of my projects, I reuse it. If I'm making a mixture, I will go ahead and assemble my glitter ahead of time, and if some of that gets out of the container I'm putting it in, I will put that right back into a jar. And the cool thing about resin, I guess, is that it does capture glitter pretty well. It can't move after that. It's definitely in the piece. So just make sure you're not wasting it and throwing it around everywhere. When you're mixing your glitter or whatever, you can have a sheet of paper and use it as a funnel to put it back in your container. As far as metal powder is concerned, those are pretty cheap too. You can get a set for like $8. So these things are pretty cost effective, but the reason why I said earlier it can kind of add up to begin with is because there's so much stuff you can add to it. Like I started with one simple thing of mica powders, and now I have like 4 sets because I want different colors and things like that. And then glitter, I have a whole thing of glitter that I keep, you know, again, sealed and everything. I have like a collection of my own glitter mixes I made, and then I have my little, you know, different types of metallic things. Like once you get started, you'll start, oh, I need this color. Oh, I want that color. And the thing that I hesitated so much to use at first is alcohol inks, which is probably like actually the most popular kind of additive for resin, but I was just so scared. Like when you look at it, it has skulls and flames and stuff on it, and I'm really clumsy, and I just was like, I'm not having it. So eventually I decided to break down and just try it. And again, you can't use a heat gun or torches or anything on alcohol ink. The good thing about alcohol ink is that alcohol itself actually pops bubbles. Some people use alcohol spray instead of a heat gun or a torch. They'll have like a little spray bottle and they'll spritz the top of their resin. It'll get rid of bubbles. The only thing is, after you do that, you can't apply any heat. So now I told you the additives, and that's what most people tell you, but I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the additives and how they work. So what people don't know is there is an order to layering. And again, like those little tricks, they'll teach you how to do it, but they don't teach you why it's working. So of course, resin is kind of like any other liquid substance, and the densest stuff falls to the bottom. If you were to use every type of additive that I mentioned, I'm going to tell you what would happen in that piece. So let's say we had like a giant like tray or something like that, and I want to add every single additive. We're going to add glitter, acrylics, we're going to have mica powder, alcohol ink, metallic powder. I'm going to add all that together. Let me tell you how it's going to fall. So first of all, if you put glitter in anything, unless you let it gel, glitter will 100% fall to the bottom of any mold. So if you're doing books, like I love to make custom books, know that wherever you put your glitter, some of it may float to the surface depending on how gelled the resin is, but a lot of it's going to be on the face of whatever you put. The only type of resin additive that you will not see glitter with, and you have to know this, is metallic powder. So if you paint something with metallic powder, that substance, you cannot see the glitter through it. In terms of the second densest that I've seen would be acrylic. So when you mix acrylic, you want to have at least 3/4 more resin than the acrylic content. Like I said, it's very cost effective, and it has unique colors that you may not even find in mica powder. And it doesn't always have, unless you buy shimmery paint, it has a nice matte color to it, and it can color your resin a lot better than some dyes. You don't have to do as much material to get that color. You just have to make sure that it's not more paint than resin, or your piece is going to be floppy. So acrylic paint is going to fall on top of the glitter. So the glitter is at the bottom, acrylic paint's next. The third densest material would be alcohol ink that is thoroughly mixed into resins. Like if you, especially white, a lot of times that'll sink. And that's exactly why when you do that little feather technique and you swirl some white behind your piece, it's sinking to the part where it's already gelled. Now, the fourth layer, I would say, would be just mica powder resin. So you mix some mica powder, you mix a couple of, little tiny spoons of mica powder and resin to make it really colorful. That's going to settle on top of that alcohol ink. Okay, on top of that, so the fifth layer would be light mica powder. So the less substance you add to your resin, the less heavy it's going to be. So that's going to sit on top of that. Now, on top of that would just be clear resin. So if you want to make an ocean, I'm just throwing this out here, what I do, you can take your little resin with some acrylic blue, put that first, let it gel a little bit in the mold, go and mix another little batch of resin, color it with some mica powder, which is less dense than the acrylic, put it on top. And then you want to make your sky, you want to make a dome for it or whatever, you want to fill it in with just clear resin will settle right on top of it, and it looks like you're looking into water. So yeah, clear resin floats on top of it. So then if you want something even lighter than clear resin, and this is how that feather technique works again, just alcohol ink floats on top of the clear resin. So when you squirt it directly out of the bottle and you're not mixing it into resin, that alcohol is like an oil slick almost, so it floats on top. So that's what's going to be on top of your piece. And when you put that heavier substance, on top of it, the white or whatever color the back is, that's basically trapping that between it, and it kind of makes a cool picture when you swirl it and stuff like that. That's how it works. So that's the final layer, would be the alcohol ink itself. Now, the reason I actually told you this information, and I don't know why it's not explained anywhere else, is because like macros, I love macros and code and things. The possibility with these simple like commands is endless. You can make anything. Like, you just have to have an imagination. So I've given you the building blocks to doing anything, pretty much. You know how resin settles, you know how it mixes, you know what substances go where. You can predict how your pieces are going to be. You don't have to just throw stuff together and see how it works. If you have like a specific thing you want to make, you can definitely put it together. You know how it's going to fall. You can predict your outcome. That's like the most important part, I think, of resin. So I could teach you how to stir something, or I could teach you how to, you know, fill in a mold. But if you don't know how the resin works and what kind of additives, what they do, how they react, then it's the equivalent of learning like Duolingo. So Duolingo can teach you how to speak French. Like, hey, I want a piece of bread. You know, I want to order a Coke. I want to drink some Coke. I want to make dinner. Dinner is ready. But you don't know why you're saying it that way. You don't know any rules behind it, and you can't apply it. You can only learn that sentence. You can try to guess at how you may apply other things. Like, you can look up different nouns and put them in that place, but you don't understand how to use it. So when I was learning French and Duolingo, a lot of that stuff was confusing me, because I'm like, why is it this way? I don't know why it works. And so then I got a bunch of books on French verbs and grammar and stuff like that. And then I was like, how does this work? I'm kidding. So no, really, it makes a lot more sense because you understand the meaning behind it. So I can now put together sentences that make sense and not just, you know, try to switch out nouns for bread and hope that it works. So if I want to make a tray and I want to know how to make my brightest color be on the bottom, well, let's say you have a mica powder that you like my favorite color is papaya. So I'm taking my papaya mica powder and I'm trying to put it, but it just keeps floating to the surface. I don't know what to do. Well, if I have a nice looking tame orange, I can mix that acrylic, a few drops of acrylic with that mica powder, and now for sure, because it's been mixed with such a dense material, that papaya is going to sink to that bottom. So I can layer a thin coat of clear on top of that, and I know that, you know, hey, this is going to be great. Or let's say I want to put glitter on the top. Well, I know that either I got to let that resin super gel, or I have to let that resin just harden and then put another coat on it to make the glitter not fall to the bottom. Be careful. Take your time. Remember all the building blocks we talked about and go out and make some stuff.